If they take your liberty, then they've taken it all.
If we don't have a right to make laws and policy according to how we see things, what's the point?
This cry for recognition has never been satisfied.
In 1941, Southern Oregon and Northern California wanted to create the state of Jefferson. The Northern California counties felt double-crossed by Sacramento, and the southern counties in Oregon felt double-crossed by Salem, and that's what the two X's mean. We had a situation where these folks were saying, hey, we're not getting our fair share of tax dollars. We're not getting the money that we're sending down to be sent back to us for the infrastructure we need to mine and to timber. So the argument wasn't representation at the time. They just weren't sending the money back. They were spending it down in Southern California the way they wanted to. Their roads were fine. The roads here were not. And we needed the money for the roads in the rural counties. It did get all the way to Congress. However, it got there December 5th. And on December 7th, 1941, as we all know, Pearl Harbor happened and World War II put an end to that because we were coming to the aid of our country.
The people here were patriots first and rebels second.
1941 remains a pivot point because so much attention was generated. And then more recently, we have seen, for a number of reasons, the same kinds of things that create a regional concern all over the country, all over the world.
People that live in rural parts of this country think about what the proper purpose of government should be in a much different way than people that live in urban areas. I can give you some examples. Guns would be one.
Yes, sir. Well, we have a gun show here in Quincy, exercising our Second Amendment right in the great state of California while it lasts.
Can you talk a little bit about what the Second Amendment means to you?
The Second Amendment is what protects my freedoms in this country, and not just by the military or anything like that. It's my own personal protection. You know, it's my right to protect myself as well as my loved ones, my family, and my neighbors, complete strangers such as yourself. You know, that's what it means to me. It's my right, and it shouldn't be infringed upon.
You know, there are people, women, the elderly, people who may have a handicap that are very vulnerable even in their own home. And so the Second Amendment to me is very important to guarantee people have the right to defend themselves.
My experience in living up here is a lot of people feel that if I've got to call the sheriff, depending on where I live, they may not be showing up for an hour or 2 hours. I want to have a weapon to protect myself. That is, I think, a very strong argument that has been made by rural folks. But people in urban areas where there's denser population, there's more crime, they tend to think about this issue differently.
The state of Jefferson, again, is about independence, personal responsibility, and freedom. California is regulating us into non-existence.
There's no representation in Northern California at all. Southern California and the Bay Area decides everything that's going to happen to us up here.
People would all have told me many times, because I'm obviously in my store very much a supporter, and people say, it'll never happen, it'll never happen. And I tell them, it's a good thing our forefathers didn't feel the same way. We would be British.
Just because we live in a more rural area where we don't have a higher tax base and we don't have as many tax dollars throughout the, to help fund the state, doesn't mean that we don't get, the representation. It's not right at all. And the state of Jefferson, that's what they're trying to get. And I understand the state of Jefferson and what they're trying to do. As far as becoming the 51st state, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I just want my vote to count. I want everybody else's vote to count. That's what I want.
From the very beginning of the Republic, there were efforts to take part of a state and create a new state from it. So for instance, Virginia originally claimed a huge amount of territory. The folks who lived in Kentucky were separated from the bulk of the population in Virginia by hundreds of miles. It was natural that there would be a new political entity that would develop out there. Similarly, Tennessee was formed out of North Carolina. There, they formed what they called the state of Franklin, a name for Benjamin Franklin. The people in Western Virginia had long chafed under the control of the eastern portion of Virginia. So what happened essentially was they applied to form a new state. I could see how some people might suggest there are parallels to what happened in Virginia and Kentucky.
They're willing to take a risk because they feel like a way of life is threatened. I think that's what we see in a parallel with the Jeffersonians. So when you look at a group like the state of Jefferson, one of the things that they're trying to articulate, that they're trying to put forward as a way of being, is that they're not being represented by the government of California, and they're not being given their due by the broader federal system because they're subsumed within the political government of California.
Our purpose is to force a huge and dramatic expansion in the representation in the state of California so that each and every county has some.
An imagined community is a shared vision of a group which involves a deep horizontal comradeship, such that all members of an imagined community are in some sense equal to one another, whether the commoner or the king. They both share in common membership in this imagined community. In a society as far-reaching, say, as our own, there's no way you can possibly ever know everybody who's a member of the society. You can't know them face to face, so you imagine attributes of members of a community. And so the best way to really approach that is to look at the distinctive features of how members of said community interact with one another and how they portray themselves as different.
The state of Jefferson, to me, is liberty and freedom once again. When we were growing up, we didn't have to lock our doors. We could ride our bikes until dark and our parents called us home for dinner. There's just so many things that we have lost, and we want to have that back. We want to have that back for our children and our grandchildren mostly.
Growing up in a small Northern California town like I did, population 500, knew everybody. Could go ride my bicycle anywhere I wanted to go ride horses wherever we wanted to go. It was a different time, and I want that time to come back. I know maybe it's too idealistic about it, but if I can help in any way to make that happen, I'm going to do it.
One of the things that ties all the people together is a strong sense of independence and a desire to pursue those things that are important, whether it be in nature or in business, small business. People here are content with less.
When you have kids, you start thinking about the world not as how it is, but how it should be. If there's an action that you can take to affect change, If you don't do something about it, you're teaching them that it's okay. The way things are is fine, and that there's really no difference between the way it should be and the way it is.
We have 2 grandchildren, and they're still really small, but I want them to realize that everything that we did here is for them. It's for their future and for their children. California used to have really high education standards. Now they have implemented Common Core. We don't want a generation of kids that graduate high school and are not accepted into college because they cannot pass that college entry exam. We need our youth to be properly educated and be able to become productive adults. This has nothing to do with white Christians. This is about us, our freedom, our rights, our representations. Terry Raposa is half Spanish. Wynn Carpenter is Native American. And I'm Cuban. I am a full-blooded Hispanic woman. I was born in Havana.
Well, there's a tendency for people to think that the state of Jefferson is this white Christian movement, when in reality, it's a movement for everyone. The reason we have that problem is that there are so few minorities in the North State.
I would love to see the movement take root in a positive way where more groups are represented.
My entire congressional district is 1% black. So, I mean, come on. You're not going to find many people of color as proponents of this because there are so few people of color in this region. A lot of people would think that you would have rednecks and bigots and whatever else up here, but these are some of the nicest people I've ever met.
You know, this whole Anglo Christian, redneck mentality or mythology has turned people into enemies of the state.
Under the Constitution, if a state wishes to be formed from an existing state, the new state needs the permission of the existing state, as well as the permission of the U.S. Congress. First of all, you have to get the state of California to agree to it. I think that's going to be really difficult.
This is an attempt to carve a state out of 2 existing states.
There's this idea in international law that populations should be able to self-determine their political fate. And that sounds great, but it raises a host of real practical questions. I think that's what the Jeffersonians are running into.
When we create the template for how it's done and win the Supreme Court case, there are other states that will be doing exactly what we've done. And we might wind up with 57 states.
There is no reason why Salem or Sacramento would want to let this territory go.
In the California State Legislature, we have 2 houses. The lower house is the State Assembly, which has 80 seats, and the upper house is the State Senate, which has 40 seats. Each chamber has the districts, 40 in the State Senate, 80 in the State Assembly, that are based on population. And so that means that with California's population now being close to 40 million, a state assembly member has a district where they are representing about 500,000 people, and a state senator has a district that's representing close to 1 million.
One senator for every 1 million people is ridiculous. And it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, you're not going to be represented. And unfortunately, Southern California has, well, they have 111 representatives, and in the 21 counties that have now signed on declarations to form the state of Jefferson, we only have 9.
If we had representation from people that lived among us up here in rural Northern California, our views would be espoused. Common sense, it seemed, would be so much more prevalent rather than what we have now, which is tyranny from 900 miles away.
In 1964, the Supreme Court ruled that population has to be equal in these legislative districts. It has to be the concept of one person, one vote, and these districts should be equal in population.
The dissenting justice in the Reynolds decision said, when they established this one man, one vote deal, he said, if we do this, we'll create a nation with an entirely city point of view. And so what we want to do with this lawsuit is restore checks and balances so that communities have voice too. We have to make our move now.
So what would the financial structure of Jefferson look like? We have to look at two parts of it primarily. The state, and what is the state going to take on, and then the counties. Because the counties and the local level, and then the cities underneath the counties, they're the ones that provide the direct services. So if you have an agency or multiple agencies like California, you have about 570 plus agencies. You don't need state intervention. You need counties to operate that, or you need cities when you have more concentrated populations. We've had direction from the state, you shall spend here, you shall spend there. That goes away. What for our community or our county is important. And then you can start trimming the budget because the state's no longer going to be in your business. So when you look at all those funding sources that comes in, the state just routes it back to the counties and said, this is your money, this is where it came from, you spend it where you see best see fit. A bunch of urban lawmakers have taken away our ability to make a living with what we've been given. And so we get back to the lumber and the fishing, and then how we use the water resources and the mining. Those would all come back and pretty much immediately, as far as, pulling back the regulation and letting those companies reboot the system.
The resource counties of Northern California used to be known as the Jewel of California. And we did that based on responsible resource use. You look around you, this land here that you're standing on has been continuously mined, farmed, and logged for over 150 years. Can you tell by looking at it? Not really. In fact, it needs to be logged again because there's so many trees here that it's a fire danger now. And it's a danger not only to me, but it's a danger to the environment, because when you see a tree grow, that is carbon sequestered. When you burn it, the carbon's released. If you cut it down and build something out of it, that carbon will be sequestered forever.
When you have the resources that we have here, and yet provide those same resources in an environmentally responsible way, that's a win-win for everyone. The concern would be the exploitation of those resources by some corporation.
We have the residue of these years of mining, of overfishing, of the timber industry clear cutting that perhaps can be looked at as, oh, we used to have so much, where is it now? Well, we used it up. So we better figure something else out and not expect to return to that.
I'm a city girl, but I have been in Northern California for close to 27 years. Life up here is a lot more peaceful, a lot more laid back.
When I'm in Oakland or any part of the Bay Area, I'm just so tense. I see nothing but cars and concrete. And when I come here, I am just so relaxed.
I don't think there's been very many days where I haven't looked out and been very grateful for being here. I love it. I love the life. I love the animals. I love the wildlife. People here really connect to the land.
Classical versions of nationalism have always emphasized connection to land and possession of land, not only in a sort of sense of squatters' rights, but in a more cosmic or metaphysical sense of we have a divine entitlement to this land.
You have rights to the core of the earth. Even California real estate law, from the center of the earth through your property lines, 300 feet in the air, you own that. So how can it, say, well, you shotgunned my this drone over my house? Yeah, it was within the 300 foot limit over my property. Okay, that is my dominion. That is my domain. That is my castle. And so that's what you're looking for in Jefferson, is these property rights, because it all comes down to, if you don't have property, you don't have property rights, you truly have nothing. You're truly a serf working somebody else's land.
The State of Jefferson movement is certainly a blood and soil concept. I think that the people here, in fact, that's one of the things that they're hoping to preserve, that so many people have moved away from the land, so many people have moved away from their families. And there's power in that. There's power in family, there's power in the land, there's power in understanding the cycles of nature. Ironically enough, I think a lot of the people who are fighting for the state of Jefferson identify with the tribes and how they felt in that point in history, that their land, that their homes are being threatened.
I think the state of Jefferson would be good for the area, and the Shasta Nation can help. The Shasta Nation Aboriginal homeland is just about all of Siskiyou County.
Well, we're not recognized, but we have we are previous to recognition. We are a sovereign tribe, the same as when the white man got here.
I have a library. I started saving things when I was 10 years old because there wasn't much about Indians people, so I started saving everything I could
I
find.
got some real old books that are, I really like this. And which one is?
Used to be the Indians took a lot of hardships. Now it's everybody.
This is what we have to deal with here. The state is overwhelming us with terrible laws that we can't hold up under. We have to get out of the state of California and become our own state.
A lot of people here can relate to the loss that Native Americans felt.
Indian reservation, and it depicts a rattlesnake and a horned toad. They say on the desert you see one, the other one's close by. As a rule.
Urban California, urban Oregon fuels the rural areas. That's where the incubation of new industry occurs for the most part. That's where the population base is that provides the tax dollars that support the rural area. There are two different lifestyles, but they interact, they support each other, they are symbiotic.
The priorities of LA are not the same as the priorities up here. We have this large land mass that goes pretty much unnoticed aside from our water. And so we need to have that representation to even have a voice in Sacramento. And right now we really don't have a voice.
In '64, when they changed it to one man, one vote, and even the Senate and the Assembly was based on population, that's when rural Californians, felt like they lost the representation that they had.
It's not as though folks in a Northern California county have less power in the legislature through some kind of rigged system like they had in Virginia. It's simply that there aren't that many people living in the counties of Northern California versus San Francisco or Los Angeles or San Diego.
The numbers don't add up. More money comes into Jefferson from Sacramento than goes out. Give me a break.
The northern part of the state receives a lot of financial benefits Richer parts of the state send tax revenue up here for schools, for roads, etc. And I don't think we'd want to lose those economic benefits by seceding.
You look at Idaho, you look at Wyoming, and you look at Utah, stuff like that. Rural western states, they operate, okay? They have a standing government, their people aren't starving, and so there is a logical framework to say, yes, there are small rural states that exist.
If the state of Jefferson was to become a state, that would automatically mean you'd have 2 more Republican senators, and I don't think the Democrats would ever go for something like that. And of course, our state legislature, which is controlled by the Democrats, they're not going to support that right now. So I think this position of trying to figure out a way where they could get more representation up here is much more doable than trying to actually create a 51st state.
It's hard for people outside of this region to understand how much we need to have a voice, how much we need to have some recognition. We have a very high poverty rate. We have a very high level of unemployment, where the nation says, you know, we're only looking at 4% unemployment. In this region, we're looking at 21 to 25% unemployment.
Yeah, they have legitimate grievances. These are places in many ways left behind. The way to address them is not to present this romantic idea of a new state where we can stand on our own and say goodbye to Oregon and California and blame all of our problems on those 2 entities. That's not where the problems come from. The problems are much deeper and require concerted work amongst people to figure out what kind of solutions can occur.
Is the government serving us in any way? Do you have any plan to improve the lives of the people here who deserve that improvement as much as anyone in Los Angeles or San Francisco? We have the ability to make a living for ourselves and our families. We're surrounded with all of the means to do it. We have been denied those means because the innovators and the service economies have denied them to us through our lack of representation. It all comes back to that.
If you only base the representation on population, then you never have to work with any of the rural parts. But if you base it on geographical representation, geographical apportionment, then you have to work with them. You have to get them to vote for your legislation. And we don't have that right now. They don't have to care what we think. They don't have to listen to us.
We have an affidavit in our case from a former assemblyman, and he says he represented more than one county. And there were times in his tenure when he would have to specifically fail to represent part of his constituents in order to represent the other part because they had competing interests. We see that in Senate District 1 all the time. 10 counties voted in plurality against SB 1, the water bond. And yet our state senator, because he represents a moneyed community in an urban area, he voted for it. Liberty for us is different. It isn't liberty in the sense that Democrats and Republicans mean it.
We all want freedom. We all want less government. We want government out of our business, out of our lives. Not completely, of course, but just enough to let us be free. And so we have this common bond.
We're conservatives because we want to conserve our liberty. That's not a political persuasion as much as both sides would like to make it, as much as it is a social statement. We have one job, according to the Constitution of the United States, just one, that we failed in utterly, and that is to secure liberty for our posterity.
We're losing our liberty. You know, it's a simple thing, follow the Constitution. And basically, losing our liberty means that my grandkids aren't going to have anywhere near the life we have. In the state of Jefferson, young people get it. They understand that they have a future that isn't as good as the future we had when we were their age. and they understand that what's happening in America, that the dream is gone. But when your dream's gone, it's all gone.
We are the source of all power for government, that when government fails to serve the people, it is their right and their responsibility to alter or replace it. I will spend my last breath on this planet living up to my responsibility, which is to secure liberty for you. They all hate us. None of them wants to see the crown slip from their heads. None of them wants to see liberty in the North State. None of them wants to see liberty in California, much less the North State. No one wants to see equal representation, no one in Sacramento, because it would mean the gravy train would stop. And here is my message to them. We will never stop. We are never, ever, ever going to go away. We are never going to quit, ever, until we have liberty and representation in this state.